to me, that was my world finishing. I kind of just, everything, I kind of didn't, I don't know, I didn't really want to be anything or anywhere. It didn't really matter anymore because he wasn't here. But I suddenly had to feel, I suddenly had to deal with things. I think one of the things as an athlete you can do is, you know, if you need to, you bury things because you can push it down quite hard in how you, because you don't want to think about something maybe. Actually training really hard can be a really effective way of not thinking, and sort of stopping those emotions. But it wasn't part of the main club. And one of my big things is about creating clubs where disability doesn't have to be at the time when nobody else wants to train. Actually, it should be being part of the club, because, you know, I'm still a person and I want to train like I trained when I was able-bodied. It doesn't make any difference to me. Perhaps don't ever get to race their perfect race, and I was lucky enough, jumping ahead, but I was lucky enough in Rio to get that perfect race.
And when did this incredible dream begin?
I guess you're probably right. It's a bit of a weird sort of, I've not had the sort of, I guess, stereotypical career as an athlete. So right back in the beginning, so I'm quite an old athlete as well now in athlete terms, but in the beginning, so to speak, I was able-bodied, and so I was actually a runner, and I had got an Olympic dream as a teenager to run in the Olympics, and that's what I wanted to do. And then sort of late teens, I ended up developing an illness which ultimately ended up with septicemia and things. So it ended up having legs amputated, because ultimately saved my life. And so it was sort of, I guess, literally turned my world upside down, as it would do to anybody. But as an athlete, it was a positive and a negative again, in that obviously I couldn't run, I wasn't able to do what I wanted to do. My dreams suddenly felt like they'd gone overnight, and it's just really hard, I guess, basically. And then I think from sport, for me, that was one of the biggest things that I've always been able to take through with me through my career, is actually what sport does teach you, the values of sport, the sort of what it means, that just the things like goal setting, learning how to read how you feel, how your body's feeling. And so for me, it was about going, I'm an athlete, I'm not, you know, I don't want to give up sport just because I haven't got any legs. And although it sounds old and old-fashioned, or a long time ago, sort of 18, 20 years ago when that happened for me, it makes you realise now and appreciate where Paralympic athletes have got to, and disability just in general, because it just shows how much people and society is changing, when actually a lot of the time we don't think it is. But if you look back to sort of 18, 20 years ago, and Tanni Grey-Thompson was doing and was achieving amazing things, but actually it wasn't really understood, it wasn't really looked at. It was more of a patronising well done, rather than she's an athlete. But she was kind of the sort of person that I was looking at, I guess, then as a runner, and then in my transition into Paralympic sport, could see how and what she had done and achieved. So I guess that was sort of the start to my sort of athlete career, and then I've since then jumped about different sports and done some perhaps slightly different things.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get onto that in a bit. I mean, it's absolutely amazing how many sort of sports you've taken part in, or events, sorry. But reverting back to what you were just talking about there, Rachel, from going from sort of able-bodied and, you know, sort of being a strong runner, what was that like mentally? And I know you've touched on it, but how did that massively affect your mental health, sort of being in that position at such a young age?
I think it's one of the slightly strange things. I think because it's like all these things that are starting to be talked about so much more, and thankfully people are starting to be able to be more open. But sort of, disability, mental health, two big kind of, if you like, taboo type subjects, we're starting to get somewhere with mental health, and disability side of things has been perhaps understood a bit more through the Paralympics. London 2012 did make a massive difference in how I was seen as an athlete, and the respect I was given, or just the understanding that I was training as hard as somebody who was able-bodied. We've lost some of it. We've definitely lost some of that momentum and that drive. Some of the sort of not so good stuff is definitely creeping back in again, and people are sort of slightly forgetting things a bit, because 2012 was so visible, and now, yes, Rio was there, but obviously it wasn't such a big event because it's not in the home country, and all of the positive things that London brought, that has sort of got lost again a bit, that sort of message, and I guess, you know, that's another reason for being able to do things and support people like yourself doing podcasts and things, because it's a way of for both sides in a sense. But it does make you feel very different at a young age when you're at that point perhaps where you're changing your view on your body anyway, and as sort of a teenager things are different, everything feels different, you don't quite know who you are, you don't quite know necessarily where you're going, and then to suddenly be so different, and kind of literally overnight, it was a really hard journey, but it's also one of those points where actually now I'm able to help support and working with other charities to help them support people who are in those situations, whereas when I went through it, there wasn't that support, because mental health was seen, or mental health in any form in that word, was still seen as very, very weak and not something that you talked about. And so actually it wasn't part of the service in the sense of how you went through the process of having amputations, and you get physio, you learn to walk again with a prosthetic. There's a sort of a pathway that you follow post amputation, but at no point was mental health in there. And so I think actually in lots of ways I should have shoved it to the back of my head, dealt with it, got back into sport because that was what I knew. And actually in some ways it's kind of crept out. It probably sort of 5 years after that, I found I probably had my hardest time with it. And I think it was because people were starting to talk and say, actually, it's okay to talk, and things started to change a bit. So, yeah, I think that it's going to be hard. And, anybody who is ever listening to this now, I think, it's just so important that you reach out. And there are a lot of people out there who will help you.
So when post-17 and, after you've obviously had the horrendous disease and you go into sort of the Paralympics, your first sort of major venture was Beijing. I mean, I've lived in Asia myself, and I know the big bright lights. And how was that experience? That must have been such a culture shock and so crazy.
Oh, it was, and it was something I've been to India, I've been to Africa a bit, I travelled a bit before, but it was, and it is very, very different. You're right. And so one of the things they try and do, especially before big events, so pre-Olympic, Paralympics, is that they try and take the team that are probably most likely to be going, or at least a number of them, to that venue, so that you do get to experience the culture and the country a bit, because otherwise, as you say, it is a culture shock, and you're trying to perform in this bubble, and yet actually you've got this kind of all over the place attracting your attention. And so if you've been to a country before, even so for Beijing, we literally went to Beijing for 48 hours and flew back again, but it gave us that feeling of what to expect, really, in just the way that people are, the way that the country was, just experiencing things that perhaps I find really uneasy in Beijing, and just because they're so different from what we're used to. And so I think that was for me, that was a really, really big part of me being able to perform, was going out to Beijing before. And you just got to experience things like the Bird's Nest, as I said, the big stadium hadn't been finished. We were in a hotel opposite, and you weren't allowed to look out, and there were people making sure that you weren't looking at it and things. It's just things that we're just not used to, and a very different sort of, just different rules, different everything really, and experiencing those things before you compete, if you can, is a really big asset, I think, to you then going out to actually race.
Do you think all those things encompass that you were just talking about, do you think they're positives or do you think they're negatives?
I tend to think that, and it's a bit of a cliche in a sense, but I do tend to find that every negative has a positive, and every positive has a negative, and it depends who you are in a sense and what you're looking for and what you choose to see in something. So having a really negative experience in front of you, a bit like I was talking to somebody about slightly differently but very similar the other day about the pandemic and the situations we're all in at the moment, and everybody's in a negative to some extent at the moment, whether you're not working and you're at home and you're suddenly having to deal with teaching your children, trying to work at the same time as teaching, or whether you're like my sister, who's an intensive care nurse and she's got a job, she's working, but she's seeing horrendous things and having to make horrendous decisions every day. And so she's got the positive because she's got a job, but she's got a negative because it's a really, really hard job to be doing at the moment. And so I tend to look at it in the sense that yes, something's negative, but actually it's much more important to look and find the positives, because every time you do look, there always is something positive out of something. It is that every cloud has a silver lining type scenario, I think. I do really find that if you look at things in that way, then you will find the positives. You can change how you look at things, change your mindset. And that's about life in general as well as sport for me, I think. And it hopefully makes me, so I think it's something I've learned through sport though. So I think hopefully it makes me a better person, or at least able to look at things in a better way to help myself at times when it's really hard.
Do you think, obviously we will get into Beijing in a sec, but do you think that the coverage for Paralympians is sort of at a better state now than what it was back in 2008?
It is definitely. I mean, when I look at what was covered in Beijing or 2008 games, it really wasn't a massive part of it. It was definitely on the scale in the sense that it was being improved. It was becoming much more realised. But again, it massively depends on where the games are as to what that sort of culture feels about disability, I think. And that's quite a big reflection, I think, in the games on that. But having said that, obviously the things like Paralympic, International Paralympic Committee, IPC, and people, and the Olympic Committee are aware of those things, and it is far more, it is being looked at in a far more equal way. Just the way it's portrayed, full stop, it is far more on that scale. But it's those things that actually, if it's filmed and it comes back to the UK and people watch it, and that's fantastic because it changes things and it changes my life. It gets people to realise things, and it also makes people see things that if they are suddenly find themselves awake, having woken up in a massive, road traffic collision or something, and they are no longer able to walk, they've lost a limb, something's happened, that actually seeing that people can do things still, it doesn't have to be a superhuman thing, it's just about being able to live your life still. And if we can get that meaning out, then that for me is really, that's probably one of the most important things, is getting that meaning across. Just that actually life's worth living, life is really good. Yeah, it's hard sometimes, and a lot of things, there are loads of challenges that I wouldn't have chosen to have, and I would, have much rather been a runner still and be able to walk around and all the rest. However, again, looking at that in that way, yes, you can see all the negatives straight away. However, I wouldn't have got to experience half of what I've done if I hadn't ended up as an amputee and hadn't ended up as a wheelchair user. So, it is having to look at it in that way. And I think you're always going to get days, whether you're a wheelchair user, whether you're disabled, whether you're able-bodied, you always have days, don't you, that are just hard days, sometimes without a reason. And it's just an emotional day, or it's just really hard, tough times for so many reasons in your life. And actually it's remembering that sometimes as well, that it's not just because I'm a wheelchair user, it's not just because I'm this or that, that might just be life, full stop. So actually I get to do amazing things, and I get to hopefully go into doing a lot of things in schools and going in and getting those children who are either newly disabled or have got some challenge. Again, working with children a lot more now that it's not such a thing about disability focus, it's just about the fact that they've got a real challenge in their life. And for me, going in, the wheelchair just symbolises a challenge to a lot of children. They understand that I guess it's like a badge in a sense to them, is that going, well, she has a challenge, something's not that easy for them, that allows them to be able to work with me really closely in helping them to change how they think, because they can see that it's a visible challenge, if you like. And I found that really helpful, working with school kids. So it's swings and roundabouts.
But it's really inspirational, Rachel. What you're doing is fantastic. My partner works with kids with special educational needs, and I know it's not the same, but just having inspirational people come in and chat, I know completely lifts the children's spirits, and it's a massive thing. And some really lovely words there. With regards to Beijing again, this is, I'll watch it on the telly and I'll think, wow. But how is it when, obviously you're a hand cyclist, you're about to start the race, you must be so nervous. I mean, is that coming from a normal person? Is an athlete's mindset completely trained and just driven? Do you not get the butterflies? How do you feel when you're about to start a race in an Olympic Games?
It is the most ridiculous thing ever when you put it like that. It's funny, and I kind of say it with people who struggle with anxiety, just in life. Really anxious for whatever, loads of anxiety, especially at the moment, again with the pandemic. But actually, you can use it in a good way. So if I got to the start line and didn't have a level of those butterflies, that feeling like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing here, or those sort of feelings of, where do I even start? I don't know what I'm doing. I wouldn't be a very good athlete, I think. It does allow your body to work to its best. So it's about learning how to work with it and to use it to your advantage again, rather than letting it overtake you. And, as I said that sentence, I can actually, if any of my previous coaches heard that, they would just start laughing, because I am one of the world's worst and always have been on a start line. I am a nightmare with it. I can control it once I'm actually on the start line, and I'm absolutely fine. But that last 2 hours before I race, a jittery mess. I am all over the place, ask really stupid questions, and I know I do, and I just can't stop myself. And really, really shaky. So on the, for example, when you go out, slightly different for hand cycling, but when I then went into rowing, you have to measure the way where the floats are in power rowing to stop the capsizing. You have to measure how there's just got to be touching the water basically on both sides. And I was shaking so much before Rio on the start, going off to the start line, that they couldn't measure it. They were just like, oh God, just go, because we just can't do it. Just go. And but again, once I'd rowed out and I'm on the start line, I'm locked, ready to go, absolutely fine. But that 2 hours, then the last sort of half hour is probably not the best place to be around. I'm not the best person to be around at that point. But it is about being able to flick that switch. So once I go onto the start line, and once it is just me on that start line, then, and all the coaches are gone, and whoever support staff is around you is gone, then I can click into that. Right, I'm racing. It's me. I know what to do. Everyone else has done their job. Now it's my turn to do my job, because the coach has done all the work in helping me to get ready. The support staff in the morning, the physios before, they've all got you into that place of being in the best place that you can be to race. And it does take a lot. It does take, for me particularly, it took a lot to learn how to control that, and how to think in a much better way. So even if I've got those thoughts flying around my head going, I don't even know what to do. I don't actually know. How do I know what to do? What, all these silly things. But actually, lots of those feelings and lots of those things do transfer over into anxiety that people struggle with every day. And so I guess it is being an athlete, and you have that head of being able to focus directly on something and absolutely not let anything else into your head. But equally, you're the same as anyone else at the end of the day with how it feels as well.
Yeah, I think we think of like Paralympians and Olympians as just like superhuman. I think, it is just one of those things, especially Paralympians, superhuman. So it's a crazy sort of thing to have, because I mean, I struggle with bouts of anxiety, but that's just in sort of everyday life, and you sort of simplify it, don't you? But for you guys, you just think, on that international stage in front of thousands of people watching on the telly, millions of people watching on the telly. I just think when you won that gold medal in the individual time trial, I mean, you must have been so proud hearing that anthem, seeing your family. I mean, that's surely, Rachel, in a moment where you've got to think everything that has happened for a reason.
Yeah, I do tend to go along those lines quite often, to be fair, in that thought process. I think that, just jumping straight back to that feeling of being on the podium and Union Jack, flag going up in front of you, the national anthem, I was lucky enough in Beijing to have my family pretty much directly opposite in the stadium where I was. Yeah, and that was, yeah. And so I was able to see their emotion, and I kind of go to, because children often ask what it feels like, and I say it's like every emotion that you can possibly imagine put in a washing machine on full speed, because it's just surreal. That's the only answer, really. It is surreal. There's just this incredible feeling that almost makes you feel like you're weightless in a sense. It's almost an out of body experience. I think I almost feel that it's like looking down on yourself. It's almost the world stops and you're looking down on the scenario that you're in, rather than almost feeling it at that moment. It's almost so much that you can't take it in. It's absolutely incredible. And it's, having that Union flag on the sort of GB kit, the realising you've got your podium kit, which you're told to pack in just in case you get there. But actually there's that horrible moment of thinking, am I being really cocky here? I've put my GB, like the tracksuit in for podium wear, into my kit bag that morning, and you have to, because that's part of, you have to have it on you in case that happens. But obviously you can never control a race, and you never know the outcome, however much you hope you do, and however much preparation you've done to get yourself into that position. You obviously you can't control all those factors. You can go out and control your own, and that's one of the biggest things that I think I learned from sport, which is what I try and take into people who are struggling with things for lots of different reasons. But control what you can, and that's the point that you can then step up from. If other people can have an impact on you, but actually it's you that controls how you react. It's you that controls what you do with those emotions and the reaction, and how you then sort of follow through and deal with things afterwards. So actually those amazing moments also sort of translate and take all those values of sport all together, because to get to that point and being on the podium and having that amazing magic moment, happens because you've learned to manage all these other things to get to that point, to get the near perfect race. And my Beijing race was nowhere near perfect. And a lot of athletes perhaps don't ever get to race their perfect race. And I was lucky enough, jumping ahead, but I was lucky enough in Rio to get that perfect race. And it was, and is something that I will possibly never feel again, but was just so incredible because everything happened as it was meant to.
So, post-Beijing, you've got the gold medal. You've sort of got to the pinnacle of what you wanted to get to. Talk to us about post-Beijing and what happened after that and you know, I guess pre-London 2012.
Yeah, it's amazing to think that London is 8 years ago, or, you know, it's incredible to think that. And I have to remember when you go into schools now that some of them weren't alive when you raced in that race. You suddenly think, oh my God, this is so long ago. It's funny. There's a big sort of known dip, really, that a lot of athletes and coaches go into. So you get that rise, and especially if you've achieved amazing things and things have happened, or what they were expected to do, and then you give the whole team a massive lift. But actually coming back to life and being back to normal life, the moment you get off that flight, when you get home and you walk back in the door, you've got your gold medal, you've got your medal, you've got your memory, whatever it is that you come back with. But actually, it's this weird no man's land almost for the next year, but particularly the next 6 weeks, because most people then have a block, like 6 weeks, for example, off. Coaches can then go away, physios, all the support staff. Athletes have downtime, they can go off, and some of them will be thinking about whether they want to retire or not. Some of them will be planning their future within sport still. So there's a whole sort of lot of different things that happen at that point, but you've been away, and also before the games, you're with people on camps for such a block. So as a rowing, we were away for nearly 2 months solid before we raced, and went out into the games. So it was basically away for 10 weeks. I think we had 2 nights home within that block. So you aren't used to being at home, yet you then fly in, get home, and suddenly life's like just normal again. And you've been in close quarters or sharing a room with somebody who's not family for potentially up to 10 weeks. You've been, jumping around the place for different training camps again, but not really living normal life, but living this weird athlete life. And then, again, coming out of Beijing for me and the coach I was working with, obviously I'd achieved my goal and got more than I expected. I didn't expect to come out of Beijing with a gold. And so it was sort of, all these things happening and then going back to normal life. And I know the coach at the time I had, he found that really hard, that point, because, you're suddenly separated from these people that you've been living with for however long. And then, don't necessarily see them for that block of time because you're not in coaching. You don't have to turn up to anything. You're just enjoying being normal for a bit and not being an athlete. And then people start coming back together and there's no focus, there's no drive, because suddenly that 3 3/4 years feels ages away to the next games. And people kind of go into this no man's land, and so many athletes and so many members of staff end up on antidepressants or really struggling because there is just this massive dip in how you feel.
I guess, is that helped a little bit, Rachel, by, obviously we know with anxiety and depression, having those short-term goals is a big thing for a lot of people. With yourself, was it a massive thing that you had the World Championships to focus on in Canada?
I think it really does make a big difference having that. It was an amazing, and also going out to that world, I knew that I could then achieve. So I went into it in a very different space or headspace, because I knew that I could achieve then, rather than me hoping that I could achieve. And they're quite different, although they're the same sort of thing. They're actually quite different sentences. And again, if you are saying to yourself, I can't do this, as a lot of people who struggle with different things say, they'll turn it into their head will use it against them, saying, I can't do this, I'm not good enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not clever enough, I'm not da 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 da, so many reasons. Whereas actually I was then able to go, I know I can do this. I know I might not be the best at sprinting, I might not be the best at this bit, but I do know that the uphills are my strengths. So I go away and work on. So for me, coming out, I went away a lot to work on the weaker parts of my race, so that I could hopefully build at that point. So where everyone else was having slightly downtime, then I used that I used that in my advantage, to go out and build those bits. I'd got strength suddenly, in the sense, and I'd got belief in me. And so, yeah, it was about using that time really wisely, and focusing, as you say, on the Worlds coming out in Canada, that were amazing as well. So, yeah, it's so much about advantage.
So, in Canada, let's not just brush over this, Rachel. So, time trial gold, road race gold. At this point, what is, we talk about mental state a lot, which I'm really enjoying on this podcast because I think it's huge. Obviously, with sort of 3 golds in your back pocket, going to London, your confidence must have been absolutely sky high.
It's strange you say that, because in one way it was, because, as I say, I knew that I could do it, and then on another level, actually competing in the home games threw a whole load of things into me, factors that I really wasn't expecting, and feelings I wasn't expecting to feel, and actually in lots of ways it made me feel more nervous, more aware of that side of things, because suddenly you actually really wanted to race and you wanted to get gold. You wanted to be in a home games and get gold, because that must be the pinnacle of everything that you could do as an athlete. So few athletes get to race and get gold. So few get to race in a home games, because it very rarely happens. And so I think that started definitely creeping into my head a lot more, about just thinking, but that person's going to be there, or people also were starting to ask or send emails or getting in touch and say, oh, we've got a ticket, we're going to be watching, and actually, which is great, and it was fantastic, but we're having that slight worry, or just that just having that different pressure put on you, that actually you really wanted to perform, and obviously that's what we all want to do all the time, but actually to be able to perform and get a gold in your home games is probably the biggest pressure that I could experience. And yeah, so it's a strange one.
Yeah, and obviously, going up to London, obviously you had those 3 golds in the bag, but you experienced something absolutely horrendous going up to the London Games, which is a huge life impact, and would be a huge life impact on so many people. So are you all right to just go into that, Rachel, and maybe how that affected your preparation and your mentality going into the 2012? Because as much as everything going on with the pressures of London, this must have just been a massive curveball, really.
Oh, yeah, completely. It just sort of shattered everything that I'd worked for, everything that I dreamed of, everything of going into that games, of it happening. 6 weeks out from the games, we were doing last time trial. So road race, last time trial out on the roads, and it's my local one. I'd been doing it all summer. It was coned, so it's on the edge of a dual carriageway, and it happens every night. It's all flagged, it's signed, it's well known. Anybody that drives the road in the evenings always knows that it's happening in that time. And it's coned off down the side, so there's enough room for the traffic to go by and for cyclists to stay safe. And it literally was the last road ride I was doing before the games, because to try and eliminate and to get, again, another factor to try and control, to eliminate the risk of getting injured or getting hit or something awful happening out, then everything then starts becoming more and more focused about being on camps anyway, but also we've all got turbo trainers, so the ones that you can sit on your bike so that you can train indoors, but you still use your bike. All of those things are starting to come into place, and we were due to go on camp. So the first bit of the camp before you start tapering. So it's the last heavy camp block of work. And yeah, that evening, their last evening, and out doing time trial, and a car came in from behind, and she just came straight through the cones and went straight into the back of me, hit my bike and just sent me up into the air. It's a dual carriageway. She was going somewhere between 65, 75. And, somehow I survived it. If you take away any of the other bits, survive crash like that, and especially on a bike, on a push bike, it's not a great match for a car at that speed. And actually, I think my handbike on that day was probably, if that had been a two-wheeled cyclist, who the guy behind me or in front of me, then they probably wouldn't have walked away from it, because the bikes wouldn't have taken it. But because of the way the frame's built on mine, the shock went through the back of the wheels, and through the frame in a very different way. And also, because I've got three wheels, two at the back and one at the front, it gave me a platform to land on. And so when I was hit, I was hit up, and it allowed because the aerodynamics, if you like, on the frame, the wind went underneath, and it created almost like a safety buffer, so that I didn't just, get run over by the car, but coming over the top of me or anything. So I was very, very, very lucky that I got out of that part of it alive. And I guess she took away everything as it felt that night. It felt all for the sake of sending a text, and it just, I guess, I don't think she really realised, and she wouldn't have known what I was doing. I totally agree, and that doesn't make me any less right or more sort of right or wrong to be hit at all. But she just crushed my dreams in a few seconds. Very, very lucky to be alive, and I landed with a dislocated shoulder. So I'd gone up flying into the sky and then landed, and I can tell you that landing onto tarmac was not a very comfortable landing. That my shoulder was, I dislocated it one direction already doing pole vault when I was younger, and as you do, and then the way that she hit it out, it came out forward, so anteriorly rather than at the back, and so it just ripped everything, and it was excruciating. And then, I was very, very lucky not to end up paralysed from the neck down, because I'd got a crack in my vertebrae at the top, I'm in my neck. There are a couple of other sort of fractures across on my scapula. And that was sort of, to me at that moment, and I remember thinking, and I remember saying to the ambulance crew, like, that's it, it's gone. And people were like, what do you mean? And actually, there's another cyclist behind me who stopped, and they were an amazing team. Actually, the people that scraped me off the road that night, they were incredible. And then going back to the positive negative thing though, actually, it was horrendous. It shattered a lot of my dreams and what I'd worked for the last 3 and a bit years. But actually, the next bit was really hard, but also gave me so much to work with as an athlete going forwards. in the big programs like cycling and rowing, although they run differently, cycling particularly, they you're under certain people, you're generally in a centralised programme. But as a hand cyclist, I wasn't centralised because the roads in Manchester aren't great for on a handbike, although it turns out they're not great down here either. But it was a lot safer generally, and also I could just ride without having to put my bike on. So I didn't need to be, but meant that I was probably on the edge of things a bit, so I didn't get access in quite the same way to the physios that the others did, or people that were just around as part of their team. They saw them every day if they're on the track, and road riders just don't have that contact in the same way. So actually, that massive negative became an incredible positive with the team that I ended up building around me. So the people, I didn't have the best support from my sport at that time. I think they probably had just thought there was no chance of me getting back, so perhaps there was no point in trying, whereas I was going to try to get onto that start line. And yeah, you could question whether I should have been on the start line or not. That's probably another kind of conversation, but I was on the start line in the end. But I ended up racing for this amazing team that had come together to help me to get to the point where I was as fit and healthy and strong as I could be after that crash. And the physio locally got in touch with me when she heard, and she was just incredible to me and has been since. And after Rio, she was amazing to me. So I ended up with this amazing team of people that actually were built from local people who had a interest and cared, partly because I was local, partly because I could then give them something back. But a lot of it just became this team that, I don't know, we were trying to get to a goal that probably seemed totally insurmountable to most people, and most people thought I was nuts even trying to come back to do it. But I ended up with some amazing friends out of something that happened that I should have had a lot more from that big team to help me. But actually, again, you end up with really, really good things from it. So, I don't know, swings and roundabouts.
Do you think, with the golds in the bag, do you think that this, there's an absolutely incredible image where you sort of cross the line with Karen Dark at the end and you're holding hands, and it's a beautiful image, but it's just, I find it hilarious how you got the Photoshop finish as you're coming across the line together, which is brilliant. It is brilliant, and it's it's fantastic. And do you think that is probably getting back on that starting line, getting bronze at the home games? Do you think that's possibly your biggest achievement with all the adversity that was in front of you?
It definitely is and was at some point, and it still does sit in that place in lots of ways. It taught me an awful lot about who I was to come back to being on that start line, and sort of to not have perhaps the support from people I thought I would have, to have to find that, and to learn how far I could push myself is one of the big things. I learned so much about myself through that. I also had the most amazing man in my life at that point, and in the February before London, he died, and that kind of, I guess that's probably where I got the strength to race in London from, because when Ed died, to me that was my world finishing. I kind of just everything, I didn't really want to be anything or anywhere. It didn't really matter anymore because he wasn't here. And I think because he'd been so much part of that team as well in helping me to get to London, and he wanted me to do it, that there was this sort of, it was an inner strength from him somewhere that had taught me so much about how to manage things. And also he taught me so much about how to be an athlete and how to how to manage the chair user. He was just incredible, and losing him was probably one of the biggest drivers though to London. So that even though I don't know how I did it, and I don't know how I did it because it hurt so much. My shoulder was awful, but yeah, I think he was one of those big driving factors at that point. So yeah, it was one of the hardest challenges to overcome, definitely, but it gave me so much, which then was what enabled me, and then looked at, for me in Rio, having changed sports, that was also one of my most, for a different reason. And it's interesting, isn't it, when you try and kind of pick a moment, those two probably are the most pivotal, most special, I don't know which kind of words you'd use really, but they're the two biggest impacts in my life, I guess, as well, with other things happening around them. But each of those has then helped me to do something else since, and to be able to manage a scenario that I was in after Rio. So maybe we do have all these things before because it helps you to manage something that's coming in the future. I don't know.